The night I swapped plates with my husband was the night everything changed. I watched him curl up in pain, his face contorting in agony, just like I had so many times before. And that's when I knew I hadn't been paranoid. Someone had been poisoning me all along. But let me take you back to the beginning, to the part of the story where love was still love, before it rotted from the inside out. David Mason walked into my life like a movie scene. You know the type, tall, charming, a magnetic smile that made your brain turn to mush. We met at a bookstore. He bumped into me in the psychology aisle, made a self-deprecating joke about Freud, and 30 minutes later we were having coffee. 2 months later, we were married in a quiet civil ceremony with barely anyone in attendance. I told myself we were just lucky. When you know, right? Except, I didn't know. Not really. The first time I met his mom was about 3 months after the wedding. David insisted we stop by on the way to our romantic cabin getaway upstate. It'll just be an hour, he said, brushing my cheek with his thumb. She'll love you. He was wrong. Her name was Loretta, 50-something, hair dyed a little too black, skin too pale, eyes that studied you like you were already guilty of something. She smiled, but it didn't touch her eyes. Her hugs were stiff, her conversation clipped, and her food strange. That first visit, she served some type of stew. It looked normal, smelled decent, but halfway through the bowl, my stomach began cramping violently. By the time we got back to the car, I was doubled over, drenched in sweat. We turned around. David drove me home instead of to the cabin. It must have been the drive, he said. You get motion sickness sometimes, right? I nodded, too nauseous to argue. But it happened again. And again. Every time we had a romantic trip planned. And every time we stopped at Loretta's first, I got sick. Uncontrollably, violently sick. I'd vomit for hours. Couldn't move. Couldn't speak. And David always chalked it up to a bug or stress or something else. By the fourth time, I started noticing a pattern. David was always fine. His mom, too. It was only me. I brought it up once. Do you think your mom doesn't like me? I asked him one night. He frowned. Why would you say that? She just seems cold. And I always get sick after eating at her place. He laughed. Not kindly. So now you're accusing my mom of poisoning you? I dropped it. But I didn't forget. Not when the nausea hit me again, the next time. Not when I saw Loretta glance at me across the dinner table with that same impassive stare. So I did something. I waited for the next trip. Waited for the next stop at her house. Waited until she served the food. Then, when no one was looking, I swapped plates with David. And that's when I knew I hadn't been paranoid. Someone had been poisoning me all along. David didn't even make it to the car. He clutched his stomach halfway down the hallway, his face pale, lips trembling as sweat broke out across his forehead. I recognized that look, the confusion, the horror, the pain. I had lived it too many times. But watching it happen to him, it shook me to my core. I don't feel right, he groaned, bracing himself on the wall. Loretta came rushing over from the kitchen, her eyes wide but unreadable. What's wrong, baby? He couldn't answer. He dropped to his knees, gagging. And I stood there, frozen. Part of me wanted to help. The other part watched, studied, measured her reaction. She didn't panic. She didn't even look surprised. Call an ambulance. I shouted. I rushed to David, supporting his head, feeling the cold sweat on his skin. He was breathing, but shallowly. He was shaking violently, and in that moment he looked so small, so breakable. But I couldn't pretend anymore. I knew what had happened. Knew it with a certainty that made my blood go cold. Because this wasn't a coincidence. It never had been. The paramedics came. Loretta followed us to the hospital, but kept her distance. She didn't speak to me. Just sat in the waiting room with her arms folded and her lips pressed thin. David spent 2 days in the hospital. The doctors ran tests but couldn't pinpoint the cause. Could be a bacterial toxin, one of them said. Something ingested. Food-related. I nodded, but I didn't say what I knew. Not yet. I waited until we were home and he was stable. I waited until he could sit up and talk again. Then I told him. I switched our plates, I said quietly, sitting at the edge of the bed. His brows knit together. What? At your mom's? I switched our plates. The food. I ate yours. You ate mine. The room fell silent. Then he laughed. A sharp, dry laugh. So what? You're saying my mom's been poisoning you? No, I said. I'm saying she's been poisoning one of us. And now we know which one. The smile vanished from his face. He stood up too fast and stumbled a little before catching himself. There was a wildness in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Something dark and unfamiliar. You think this is funny, he snapped. You think accusing my mother of attempted murder is a joke. I'm not joking, I said, my voice trembling. She's been making me sick for months. Every time we visit her. And now it happened to you. Don't you see what that means? He stepped closer. Too close. Don't you ever talk about my mother again like that, he growled. Ever. His hands clenched into fists. My heart stuttered in my chest. David. I began, but the slap came faster than I could finish. My cheek stung. The silence after was louder than the impact. I backed away. I'm leaving. He didn't stop me. Just stood there, breathing heavily, eyes wild and unreadable. I grabbed my bag and ran out the door. Drove straight to my friend Melissa's place and didn't look back. I turned off my phone. I didn't sleep. 2 days passed. No contact. And then, I turned my phone back on. There were 37 missed calls. 14 from David. 23 from a number I didn't recognize. And 1 voicemail. Just 1. That alone terrified me more than the flood of missed calls ever could. David was the type to blow up your phone, to wear down your silence with texts, voice notes, and voice cracks. But 1 message? From a number I didn't know? I pressed play with shaking fingers. Hi, this is Detective Marcia Ingram with the County Sheriff's Department. I'm trying to reach Mrs. Elena Mason. Please call us back immediately. It's regarding your husband, David Mason. Her voice was calm. Too calm, like someone trying not to shatter glass with their words. I felt the blood drain from my face. Melissa walked in from the kitchen and stopped when she saw me. What happened? She asked. I think something's wrong with David. She sat beside me as I called the number back, my heart thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The line picked up on the second ring. Detective Ingram speaking. This is Elena Mason. You left me a voicemail. Yes. Mrs. Mason, I'm very sorry to contact you like this. There's been an incident involving your husband. My voice barely worked. What kind of incident? There was a pause, just long enough to make my throat close up. Your husband is deceased. I didn't speak. Couldn't. He was found at his mother's residence late last night. There was a confrontation. We're still gathering details, but it appears he arrived there with a weapon and things escalated. I felt the floor fall out from under me. A weapon? I whispered. What kind? A kitchen knife. According to his mother's statement, he confronted her in the dining room. She claims he became violent. She says she fired in self-defense. The bullet hit his femoral artery. He bled out before emergency services arrived. I gripped the phone until my fingers turned white. He's dead. I'm so sorry, ma'am. The words echoed in my head like I was underwater. I felt Melissa's arm wrap around me, but her touch felt miles away. Later, I would drive to the police station. Later, I would sign forms and ID his body. Later, I would sit across from Loretta in a quiet, dimly lit room while she clutched a tissue and told me the truth. But at that moment, all I could do was listen. He came to my house like a madman, she said through tears. Said I tried to kill him. That I hurt you. I didn't know what he meant. Then, he pulled out a knife and screamed something about insurance. I didn't mean to shoot. I was trying to protect myself. I watched her closely. The way her eyes flickered. The way her voice cracked. Why would he say you tried to kill me? She swallowed. Hard. Because I did, she said. The air left my lungs. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I nearly choked on the exhale. Loretta dabbed her eyes with the same tissue, but it was clear now. The tears weren't just grief. They were guilt, exhaustion, fear. I made you sick, Elena. Every time. I put just enough in your food to make you ill. Never enough to kill you. Just enough so you couldn't go with him. My heart thundered. Why? Why would you do that? She looked up at me then, eyes glassy. Because I was trying to keep you alive. I blinked. What? I knew something was wrong. Ever since his first wife died, she whispered. He told everyone it was an accident. A hiking fall. But something about it didn't sit right. He was too calm. Too composed. He planned the funeral in one day. cashed out her life insurance before she was even buried. I remembered the photo he used to keep in the hallway. A woman with dark curls and soft brown eyes, frozen in time. I never asked much about her. David would shut down whenever I tried. Her name was Lacey, Loretta continued. They went on a trip to Mount Estrella. She never came back. The official report said she slipped during a hike, but she broke down then, her voice splintering. I tried to get the police to reopen the case. They wouldn't. There wasn't enough evidence. But I always knew. I always felt it. My son, he changed after that. And when he brought you home so soon, with stars in his eyes and your name already on his lips, I felt that same knot in my stomach. I sat there reeling. All those times you got sick? It wasn't food poisoning. It was me. I couldn't stop him. I couldn't go to the police. But I could delay him. Keep you just sick enough that he couldn't take you somewhere remote. Alone. I looked down at my hands, shaking. Why not just tell me? Because he would have killed me too, she said, eyes wide with raw fear. He was smarter than he looked, Elena. He had patience. Charm. He could wear anyone down, make anyone believe him. But you, how could you do that to me? Make me sick. I'm not proud of it, she said, voice breaking. But you're still here, aren't you? I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But all I could do was sit there, clutching my arms, trying to understand the woman in front of me. How long have you suspected he wanted to kill me? She hesitated. Since I found the insurance paperwork in his car. He took out 4 policies, all in your name, all listing him as the beneficiary. My stomach twisted. Without my knowledge? She nodded. I made copies. I still have them. I thought maybe if he knew I knew, he'd back off. But instead he came at me with a knife. That night, I stayed up reading every line of those policies. Loretta gave me the folder. Signed documents, typed forms, forged signatures. He'd planned everything, just like Lacey. The more I dug, the clearer it became. Lacey hadn't been an accident. She had been a trial run. Loretta gave me her old laptop and a shoebox of documents. I don't know what disturbed me more, the fact that she'd kept it all, or the fact that she'd needed to. Emails, old receipts, photos, printed text messages. She had trace patterns, timelines, even life insurance policy dates. And right there, between the pages, was the confirmation I needed. Lacey's insurance had been filed and approved just 5 weeks before her death. 3 policies, all naming David as the sole beneficiary. Payout? $1.4 million. A tidy sum for a man who always claimed he lived simply. I couldn't stop thinking about that trip, Mount Estrella. I pulled up news articles, old forums, even scanned archived social media posts. There were hiking groups who talked about seeing a couple arguing loudly near the trailhead, a man matching David's description, and a woman in a bright yellow windbreaker, just like the one Lacey wore in that photo by the fireplace. She'd vanished an hour later. I found one post from a woman named Tanya who said she'd overheard the man yelling about people who don't know how to keep their mouths shut. She thought it was just a lover spat. Now I wasn't so sure. He had isolated Lacey, then taken her somewhere no one could help. And he had planned to do the same to me. The proof kept piling up. His browser history showed recent searches about life insurance claims in cases of accidental deaths. He'd looked up secluded hiking trails, remote lake cabins, and my blood ran cold. How long before food poisoning symptoms peak? I took everything to the police. Detective Ingram reviewed it quietly, expression unreadable. She didn't say much, just nodded, took notes, and promised to open a formal inquiry into Lacey's death. But there was something else I needed to do, something that had been growing inside me since that hospital room. I needed to visit her. Lacey's grave was tucked in the northwest corner of the Stonebrook Cemetery, under a blooming dogwood tree. Her headstone was simple: Lacey Marie Whitmore Mason, 1988 to 2021. Beloved daughter, never forgotten. I stood there for a long time, unsure what to say to a woman I'd never met but somehow felt bonded to by tragedy. I'm so sorry, I whispered. You didn't deserve what he did to you. None of us did. The wind rustled the dogwood branches. I closed my eyes and made a silent promise. I would make sure no one ever forgot what he did. Not to her. Not to me. Not to Loretta. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough justice for now. But justice has a way of whispering in the dark, reminding you that closure isn't a destination, it's a choice. and I wasn't ready to settle. The weeks that followed were a blur of police reports, legal paperwork, and quiet, sleepless nights. Loretta moved in with her sister in another state, saying she needed time and space. I didn't blame her. Her son was dead, and while I believed she did what she did to protect me, I also knew the weight of that would haunt her forever. As for me, I had to start over. My marriage was a lie. My home tainted. I couldn't walk through the living room without seeing David's eyes that night, wild and cold. So I left. I sold the house and moved into a small apartment near the coast, somewhere with air that didn't carry his shadow. I changed my name back to Elena Brooks, canceled every joint account, called every insurance company David had secretly listed me on. I spent hours undoing the tangled mess he had created in such a short span of time. It was terrifying how easy it had been for him to forge my name, to steal my identity one policy at a time. I hired a lawyer, filed to have the insurance policies nullified, fought to ensure the money he received from Lacey's death would be frozen until a criminal case could be reopened. Detective Ingram kept me updated. Slow, steady progress, but progress nonetheless. One night, about a month after I left, I found a journal. Not his, mine. It was one I hadn't touched since the first weeks of our marriage. Pages filled with bubbly handwriting and hearts over the eyes. Scribbles about how fast I was falling in love, how lucky I felt. I had believed every word. I flipped to the last entry, unfinished, barely legible. He says he wants to take me to a cabin in the mountains. Says we need alone time. Something about the way he said it makes my stomach twist. Maybe I'm just nervous. Maybe it's nothing. I closed the book slowly. No, Elena. It was never nothing. It was always something. That was the moment I realized I couldn't just walk away and forget. I had to take back control of the narrative, reclaim my voice, not just for me, but for Lacey, for anyone who might fall into the same trap. So I started writing, not in a journal, online, on forums, blogs, support groups for women who'd lost themselves in whirlwind marriages, who'd been gaslit, poisoned, literally or emotionally. My story was met with disbelief at first, then support. Emails, comments, survivors, strangers. I was no longer alone. It happened one morning over coffee. I was scrolling through the forum thread where I'd anonymously posted my story when I saw a reply that stopped my heart. I think I saw her, the woman in the yellow jacket. I've never forgotten that day. The comment was from a woman with the username TrailMama82. I messaged her instantly. Within hours, we were on a video call. Her name was Vanessa. She was in her 40s, with a stern kindness in her eyes and a voice that carried the weariness of someone who'd seen too much. It was October 9th, she said. 3 years ago. I was hiking Mount Estrella with my husband. We were coming down from the ridge when we heard shouting. Do you remember what they were arguing about? I asked, breath caught in my throat. Not the words exactly, she said slowly, but the tone? It was bad. Real bad. He was towering over her, and she kept backing up like she was trying to calm him down. She had on this bright yellow jacket. I remember because I thought, that's the kind of jacket you wear when you don't want to disappear. My chest tightened. Vanessa continued. He caught me watching, and suddenly the shouting stopped. He smiled at me, a cold, polite smile. Then they walked off toward the North Trail. I tried not to think about it afterward, but when I saw your posts, the dates, the jacket, I had to say something. That single conversation changed everything. Detective Ingram reopened the case officially. With Vanessa's testimony and insurance documents Loretta had preserved, they had enough to request a review by the DA's office. A full re-examination of Lacey's cause of death was underway, and for the first time since her burial, the word homicide was no longer off the table. It was bittersweet, vindication wrapped in grief. I found myself going back to that trail in my mind, imagining Lacey standing there, wearing yellow like a beacon, trying to defuse a man she once loved, a man who had already written her ending before she even saw it coming. I realized something else then. The jacket, the color, the brightness. She wasn't trying not to disappear. She was screaming to be seen. And now, finally, she was. It didn't take long after the case was reopened for the letters to start arriving. Thick envelopes, cream-colored, cold, each one marked with the logos of various life insurance companies I had never willingly interacted with. Every time I saw my name on the envelope, I felt a chill in my spine. They were confirmation of what Loretta and I already knew. David had spent our 2-month whirlwind romance planting the seeds of my death. Each policy detailed the same pattern. My name forged as the sole beneficiary, signatures that barely resembled mine. For companies, for policies, nearly $2 million in total coverage. I was stunned they had even approved them, until I looked at the contact information David had listed for me. He'd created a fake email address, set up a burner phone under my name, and responded to verification questions himself. It was meticulous, calculated, almost professional. He never needed me to sign anything. He just needed me to die. Detective Ingram took the letters into evidence, along with timestamps showing when and where the applications were submitted. It painted a chilling timeline. David had submitted the first policy the same day we booked our first romantic getaway to the remote cabin. The same getaway we had to cancel after I got sick. There was no room for doubt anymore. This wasn't a series of unfortunate events. This was premeditated murder, interrupted only by Loretta's desperate interference. I sat with those letters one night, spread out on my kitchen table like they were parts of a puzzle I wished I didn't have to solve. I thought about the weekend getaways I had once looked forward to, the way he would stroke my hair and say, "Just the two of us, no distractions." And I realized he didn't want a wife. He wanted a payout. I burned the copies I had printed, not because I was angry, but because I was done carrying the weight. The originals were with the police now. Let the legal system carry it. Let him burn instead. But sometimes the dead don't go quietly. A month after the case was reopened, I started receiving anonymous messages. No names, no return address, just typed notes slipped under my door or into my mailbox, always folded neatly in half like they were carefully placed, not rushed. "You should have stayed quiet. He's gone. Isn't that enough? You'll ruin more than just his name." At first, I thought I was being paranoid. Maybe some twisted neighbor. Maybe some stranger who didn't believe my story. But then one message arrived that made my blood run cold. "You weren't the only one he had plans for." I stared at that line for hours. Who else? Who had he circled like a shark before settling on me? I brought the notes to Detective Ingram. She took them seriously, but said there wasn't much they could do unless the sender escalated. I could tell she hated saying it. Sometimes the ghosts people leave behind are just as dangerous as the person themselves, she said. That night, I bolted my doors, closed my windows, and slept with a flashlight in one hand and pepper spray in the other. A few days later, I got an email. No subject line. No name. Just one line in the message. "He proposed to me, too. 2 years before you. We broke up just before the cabin trip." Attached was a photo. David with another woman, laughing over wine at a small Italian restaurant. Same smile. Same charm. Her name was Meredith. We met in a cafe downtown, her hands trembling as she stirred her coffee. She told me everything. How David swept her off her feet, talked about a secluded honeymoon spot in the mountains, and how she'd backed out last minute because something felt wrong. She'd ignored it for years, chalking it up to anxiety. "I didn't realize how close I came," she whispered, tears clinging to her lashes. We exchanged contact info. Another piece in the puzzle. Another survivor. I realized then that breaking the silence hadn't just saved me. It had set off a chain reaction. Others were beginning to question, to remember to speak. And every voice was one more nail in his coffin. But sometimes the dead don't go quietly. A month after the case was reopened, I started receiving anonymous messages. No names. No return address. Just typed notes slipped under my door or into my mailbox, always folded neatly in half like they were carefully placed, not rushed. "You should have stayed quiet. He's gone. Isn't that enough? You'll ruin more than just his name." At first, I thought I was being paranoid. Maybe some twisted neighbor. Maybe some stranger who didn't believe my story. But then one message arrived that made my blood run cold. "You weren't the only one he had plans for." I stared at that line for hours. Who else? Who had he circled like a shark before settling on me? I brought the notes to Detective Ingram. She took them seriously, but said there wasn't much they could do unless the sender escalated. I could tell she hated saying it. Sometimes the ghosts people leave behind are just as dangerous as the person themselves, she said. That night, I bolted my doors, closed my windows, and slept with a flashlight in one hand and pepper spray in the other. A few days later, I got an email. No subject line. No name. Just one line in the message. He proposed to me, too. 2 years before you. We broke up just before the cabin trip. Attached was a photo. David with another woman, laughing over wine at a small Italian restaurant. Same smile. Same charm. Her name was Meredith. We met in a cafe downtown, her hands trembling as she stirred her coffee. She told me everything. How David swept her off her feet, talked about a secluded honeymoon spot in the mountains, and how she'd backed out last minute because something felt wrong. She'd ignored it for years, chalking it up to anxiety. I didn't realize how close I came, she whispered, tears clinging to her lashes. We exchanged contact info. Another piece in the puzzle. Another survivor. I realized then that breaking the silence hadn't just saved me, it had set off a chain reaction. Others were beginning to question, to remember to speak. And every voice was one more nail in his coffin. With Loretta's hesitant cooperation, we started digging deeper into David's past. She handed me old photographs, letters, and even a hidden safe deposit key she'd kept tucked away in her jewelry box. Opening the safe deposit box was like unlocking a Pandora's box. Inside were documents revealing David's web of deceit. Forged signatures, forged divorce papers, and bank statements tracing suspicious transfers around the time Lacey died. Among the papers was a letter from a private investigator David had hired, someone who had been quietly following Lacey in her last days. The note suggested David was growing impatient and desperate, hinting at a plan to speed things up. Loretta's hands trembled as she handed me the documents. He was dangerous, Elena. Not just for you or me, but for anyone who got close. We worked tirelessly, compiling evidence, contacting Lacey's old friends, and unearthing buried truths. It was exhausting and painful, but with every piece I felt stronger, more empowered. I realized the fight wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming my life and making sure David's legacy of manipulation and fear ended with me. With the evidence Loretta and I gathered, Detective Ingram finally had enough to reopen the investigation into David's criminal actions, not just his suspicious death. The DA's office took over, launching a thorough review of the insurance fraud, the suspected poisoning attempts, and the questionable circumstances around Lacey's death. For the first time, I felt like the truth was finally coming to light, not just for me, but for the other women David had hurt. A prosecutor reached out to me, explaining they were preparing charges against Loretta, too, for her poisoning, but in exchange for her full cooperation and testimony, they might reduce her sentence. That night, I made a choice. I don't want Loretta punished for protecting me, I told Detective Ingram. She was scared, and she tried to save my life in her own way. It wasn't easy to forgive her actions, but I understood the fear behind them. Months later, a court case unfolded. David was posthumously charged with fraud and suspected in Lacey's death. Loretta pled guilty to reckless endangerment but was given probation. The courtroom was full of tears, apologies, and moments of raw truth. I spoke about survival, empowerment, and the importance of seeing beyond the surface. The judge called it a cautionary tale about trust and betrayal. When the case closed, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Justice had started, not perfectly, but enough. With the court case behind me, I finally felt the freedom to breathe again. I moved out of the house I had shared with David, a place now filled with too many painful memories. Instead, I found a small apartment downtown, bright, airy, and mine. I started therapy, something I'd resisted before, and it became a lifeline. Each session helped me unravel the knots of fear, betrayal, and grief that had wrapped around my heart. I reconnected with Meredith and Loretta, strange friendships born from shared trauma, but also from resilience. I began volunteering at a local women's shelter, sharing my story quietly to empower others caught in toxic situations. Each time I spoke, I felt a little stronger. For the first time in a long time, I started dreaming about the future. Not a future planned by someone else, but one I could shape. I even started dating again, slowly, cautiously. No more rushing. No more ignoring red flags. The wounds would take time to heal, but I was ready to face that journey. The sun rose gently over the city skyline as I stood by my apartment window, sipping coffee and watching the world wake up. The morning light felt different now, warm, hopeful, like a quiet promise. I thought about everything I'd been through, the betrayal, the sickness, the lies, the loss. But I also thought about the strength I never knew I had, the unexpected allies I found, and the truth that finally set me free. Life wasn't perfect. It probably never would be. But it was mine to live. With every step forward, I reclaimed a little more of myself. The past would always be there, shadows in the corners, but it no longer controlled me. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, and my story was just beginning.